Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Career Talk series where we invite accomplished professionals from different fields to share their experiences, learnings and also answer questions. We have with us Group Captain B.S. Reddy, a former member of the Indian Air Force as our chief guest for today. I, your host Dia, along with my co-hosts Pareena, Arav and Advait will interact with him today as we learn more about aviation as a career. Before we get started, however, I request Arav to begin with an introduction of our chief guest.
Thank you, Dia. Group Captain B.S. Reddy, during his distinguished service of 26 years in the Indian Air Force, the veteran flew fighters, transport aircrafts, and basic trainers. He passed from Sainik School Korukonda in 1987 and joined the National Defence Academy. He got commissioned into the Indian Air Force in 1991, where he initially flew a few of the MiGs. Soon after attaining the day operational status, he sustained a spinal compression fracture during an ejection in a bombing training session over Pokhran Air to ground range. Being declared medically unfit for further ejections, he switched to transport AC. He was then sent on instructional assignments to the Indian Air Force Flying Trainers School. He was then sent to the Botswana Flying Trainers Arm, and on his return to India, he extensively flew the IL-76 in the northern sector. He was then sent to America for the C-17 training, where he led the squadron on its inception in 2013. He inducted the Globemaster aircraft into the Indian Air Force. Personally, he is an avid marathoner, keen horseman, and enjoys playing basketball and volleyball.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Arav. Without further ado, let's get to the career talk. I request Pareena to initiate the interaction.
Sure, Dia. To start this off, I would like to ask you a personal question. Could you narrate an incident from your school journey that has left an impact on you?
Okay, firstly, thank you, Dia, for the welcome and Arav for the intro. So, coming to this school experiences. So, my father put me into the Sainik school, for which I am very thankful to him. During the years in school, we met our principal, registrar and headmaster, who used to be from the services, so we were pretty impressed with that. And further on, I got an opportunity to represent Andhra Pradesh Republic Day contingent in 1985, where I met the only cosmonaut that time and even now, that's Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma. So I got quite impressed and motivated by his talk that I decided that I should be going for flying, and as it is the school was preparing us for National Defence Academy, it was a natural choice that I picked up Indian Air Force as my choice.
Did you always want to be a pilot, even as a child?
I cannot say that because I got introduced to flying only after joining the school, and with what I have got exposed to, including this interaction with Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma and other Air Force officers that I met in the school, and even seniors who joined the academy before us. So it was 6 years that we spent in the school from 6th class to 11th class. Every year some students would join the Air Force, initially in the National Defence Academy, then move on to the Air Force, and would hear from them. That's what motivated us, especially me, to train and focus on Indian Air Force.
How would you describe life at Sainik, the school you went to?
In the school? Yeah, it was a pretty disciplined life. I actually went from village schools that my father was posted in, and it was a welcome change. Like in the schools, before joining the Sainik school, we never had any uniform, and immediately after we joined the Sainik school, we had 6 sets of uniforms for the full year. So that was a big change, and a little homesick, of course, but then we had great friends that made us each other comfortable, and a lot of interaction, mostly through sports, less through studies, that bonded us together and nurtured us, all of us together, and all of us have reached pretty good positions in various fields that all of us are proud of.
So, sir, could you tell us something about your daily routine and how you find time to pursue your hobbies?
Okay, so while in Indian Air Force, we had inter-unit competitions wherein the sports was given a lot of emphasis, so much so that the sportsmen almost dictated what the flying program would be. They could make a program as per their training sessions, and the rest of the squadron would accommodate that. So it was so much important. A little later, when we moved to the heavy lift units, there the training, the flying schedule is a little tight. So there is not much scope for sports activities, especially the team sports. So that's when I moved on to the individual activities, mostly running, and cycling and swimming came much later. After quitting the Indian Air Force and joining the civil aviation sector, it's a different routine here. Normally we have a 5-day work pattern followed by 1 or 2 days of off. So to be able to train for the various events that I am looking at, I normally plan the easy events like swim on a day that I have an afternoon flying, and on the days that I have morning flying, I have planned a little bit of run or cycling to the extent possible, and the off days I go a little more all out for say 40 to 50 kilometers, 2 hours of run or 2 hours of 2 to 3 hours of cycling, so that I have rest to recoup before the next cycle starts. So that's how you manage time based on your routine.
Could you tell us some fond memories from your Air Force training camp?
Okay, so we had annual training camps in the NCC in the school, through which actually I've got an opportunity to represent the Republic Day contingent also. So we had great time in those 2 to 3 weeks of staying in tents, managing with minimum resources, and yet participating in various competitions which used to be drill, firing and cross country. And later on moving to the National Defence Academy, we had once again challenging camps, which was Greenhorn in the second term. That is, we had a 6-term pattern. So Greenhorn was in the second term, Rovers was in 4th term, and a Camp Trishul in 6th term. Camp Trishul was a little easy because we were already quite well versed with the patterns and activities. But Greenhorn and Rovers, it brought us all together. So the squadron group of say 25 cadets. So we were 12 squadrons. So the whole cost 12 into 25 will be about 300. So these 25 were to perform as a team under very trying circumstances. Most difficult being what we used to call the Josh run, means which is start in the morning. It's almost a little more than a marathon. In full battle rig, we had to start from the campsite through various checkpoints where some officers used to wait to give us a tick that we have checked that. So all that had to be navigated through map reading, ground map reading with a compass across jungle and mostly the rolling hills of Satpura ranges. It's all close to Pune and surrounding areas. And we had to finish the whole thing in the academy stadium. So it was about 6 to 7 hours of activity and finishing in giving a great level of satisfaction as a team event. And en route, we used to share things. We like obviously there will be some strong runners, some weak runners, some moderate runners. So like strong runners, some of us would pick up the rifle from the weak runners so that they're also able to move with the group, because we have to start and finish as a group for the event to be considered as and to get that position as judged by various officers en route. So that sharing was another thing which we'll never forget in our life, because what we go through in tough times is what you forget forever. Those are the friends that you'll remember forever.
Since aviation deals with real-time critical decisions, what are the important qualities that an aspirant must have?
Okay, so there is enough training involved both in Air Force flying curriculum as well as in the civil aviation curriculum to prepare an aspirant to deal with the situations that you are envisaging that we normally face. So this thing is accomplished with what is known as simulator training. Okay. So regular course of events, the level of activity is reasonably manageable. It is not so exhaustive, but there are some abnormal situations where there is a lot demanded from the pilot, and mostly as a team, especially in commercial aviation, there is always a set of 2 pilots in the cockpit. So they perform as a team to resolve that particular abnormal situation and come up with a solution and recover the aircraft in the safest possible manner. So it is obviously communication and prompt decision making, a clear thought process, which are necessary to be able to go through this, operate as a team and manage these abnormal situations, which is the essence of aviation in the end.
So, when do you suggest an aspirant should start preparing in order to pursue a career in aviation?
Okay, so we'll have to divide it in 2 parts. One is what I have gone through as an Indian Air Force pilot, and one as a pure civil aviation entry. Okay, they're entirely 2 different aspects. In the Indian Air Force, like I said, the level of training or the philosophy of training rather is a little different, with the aim being that mission accomplishment is primary. Okay, and but in the process you will learn a lot of things. You would have gone through much more difficult situations, and you would have handled the aircraft in much more adverse circumstances. That gives you a great level of skill and confidence, cumulative confidence, to be able to deal with any situation. For pure civil aviation entry, it is firstly immediately after not even graduation required, it's just high school, that a person, a boy, a girl can choose this career, and then there is training involved to be able to progress from initially being a co-pilot or the first officer as we call it, and then consolidate on that position over a period of 2 to 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, depending on the rate of flying and the exposure involved, and then move on to take on the roles of commander. So everything is covered in this particular gradual progression and the training involved within.
How many hours of flying does a pilot require in order to get the commercial pilot license?
Okay, so there is a normal syllabus of about 200 hours on the basic aircraft. It's normally in various flying schools both in India and abroad, and thereafter he gets what is known as commercial pilot's license, the CPL, and with that CPL most pilots would apply for a job in any of the airlines that open up, and after joining as a first officer with the CPL, then that particular pilot will consolidate on mostly on the right seat, and then when he gets about say 3,000 hours on an average, which takes about 4 to 5 years in most of the airlines on an average, then he is eligible for an upgrade to commander.
How long does it generally take for a co-pilot to become a captain?
So it's about 3 to 4,000 hours, 3,000 hours say on an average. That takes 4 to 5 years. 5 years. The COVID slowed down the effort a little bit in between. Otherwise, it's 4 years on an average. So because we came from the Air Force, we already had 8,000 hours on various aircraft in the Indian Air Force. So we didn't have to go through the CPL. So we directly apply for what is known as ATPL, and for that we have exams outside, first written exams, and there is endorsement required on one of the commercially recognized aircraft. Most of the Indian Air Force aircraft, actually except 1 or 2, are not recognized by the DGCA. DGCA is a Director General Civil Aviation, which governs various simulation activities within India. So we have to fly on payment, get our ATPL hours endorsed on that particular aircraft, which only gets registered onto the license issued. Then we can apply for any of the civil aviation institutions.
As every flight is not always that smooth, has there been any incident where you had to take a critical decision at the spur of the moment to save many lives?
One is saving our own life while flying in a fighter.
I'd say both the ways.
Yes, okay, and so I'll cover one of each. So towards about third or fourth year of flying into the fighters, I was flying the third aircraft, MiG-27, like you covered in the introduction. So we went for a air-to-ground range practice sortie from Jodhpur, Pokhran range, which is close to Jaisalmer towards the west. So after finishing the firing was uneventful. After finishing the firing, while returning to back to Jodhpur, so I had an engine partial flame out. So I tried to recover the aircraft. We were in formation of two aircraft, so the leader also kept assisting me to go through the engine relight procedure. So it would not relight successfully, or rather it would only build up to partial thrust, unable to sustain further height to continue the mission, and I was losing the height gradually. So at one particular point you got to decide whether to continue further attempts to recover the aircraft or leave the aircraft. That's when I had to eject, and so the aircraft went into the ground, but I came down with a parachute. About 20-30 minutes later, a search and rescue helicopter came from the nearest base, which is Jaisalmer, and they took me to Jodhpur because I sustained an injury in that particular ejection process. So I was told to lie down and shifted direct to the military hospital. That's one critical decision making. As far as in the multi-crew cockpit is concerned, so on one of these support missions to the north, that is from Chandigarh to Leh, after takeoff we encountered severe weather with hailstorm. So it was so vicious that the windshield in front broke, and there was pitting on the entire control surfaces of that particular aircraft. So we aborted the mission. The weather radar had a little bit of problem, so it could not detect that weather. As it is a vintage aircraft from about 60s that we picked up from the Russians. So that is black and white display and not directly accessible to the pilots. There is a lower deck with a navigator, so he would guide us on how to avoid the weather based on the display on his scope. So with all these limitations, we went into the weather, so we quickly turned back and had to make an emergency landing. Anything further into the thunderstorm cell would have probably disintegrated the aircraft.
So, like, you've gone through, training for these kind of situations, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but what was it like? Any different when you actually had to experience it? How did you keep your cool?
So training is so intense and extensive, exhaustive that if you've gone through the training, most of the real life situations would be a piece of cake. So you're trained so hard, yeah, both in Indian Air Force as well as in commercial aviation.
Sir, in your countless hours of flying, what was your biggest takeaway?
Takeaway in the sense, firstly you got to be absolutely fit to be able to take on flying. It is quite exhausting, and especially in the Air Force, the responsibilities on the crew are much more. So to be able to sustain long hours, we needed to be physically fit. And similarly in the civil aviation also, although the responsibilities are a little reduced, but the pace of flying is much more, the intensity is much more. Sometimes you're doing back-to-back missions with minimum rest period. So once again, it needs one to be absolutely fit and do not lean towards any unhealthy habits like drinking or smoking, which will further increase the fatigue and reduce your tolerance for extended hours of operation. That's the main takeaway.
So, sir, during your severe training, what motivated you, what drove you to keep going, and what do you suggest for the people who need to add more discipline to their schedule?
Okay, nice question. So, like I said, I had a little bit of setback in the compression fracture, spinal injury. So that required me to stay fit, because if I relaxed and went out of shape, it would have an impact on the back. So that actually forced me or spurred me to keep playing firstly, although many of the doctors said I would suggest you stop playing, no more competitive games, no more just restrict to a little bit of jog and this thing, okay. But I found it not inhibiting at all. In fact, the day or a few days that I wouldn't play, it would actually start hurting me. So that's how I kept going. It required me to go, and it also helped me to stay fit and manage that injury for so long.
Okay. Have you participated in many events sports-wise?
Yeah, so in the team sports, we had regular inter-unit competitions in various Air Force stations, and in the initial part of my service, I also could represent the wing team, like the station team, and maybe reached up to the command team. The command is like there are 7 geographical commands within the Indian Air Force. So reaching command team was the best that I could make it. And once I started moving on to individual events, so started with half marathons obviously, then consolidated, did some full marathons, and then tried an high altitude marathon, that is at Leh. Leh is an elevation of 11,000 feet. Okay, we are at 3,000 feet, and Mumbai, for example, is at sea level. So there are some challenges involved in high altitude marathons. You need to acclimatize. You can't like if I did a Mumbai marathon last month, I could just go the previous day and run off. Okay, but when you're practicing and registering for Ladakh marathon, you got to commit yourself that you will reach and report 1 week before, because you need 1 week to acclimatize to that high altitude, which is basically low oxygen. Only then you can participate in the event. Okay. So it's a little different than the planes. It needs you to go little slow and also monitor yourself closely. Whenever there is a problem, you need to stop. Okay. So those are marathons. Then, like I said, with my daughter moving into swim and then cycling, then I moved into triathlon. So obviously, once again, it's always a gradual progression. So I did the Olympic triathlon first, a couple of them. Firstly, actually duathlon. Before I started swimming, I did a cycle come run also. There are duathlon events. Then triathlon, Olympic triathlon, and then moved on to Ironman once I said I am probably comfortable and confident of reaching the next level. And right now, consolidated on Ironman 70.3, which is like half Ironman. And whenever I'm comfortable and have a little more time from my schedule, I'll probably shoot for the full Ironman. And on the equestrian side, so at the staff college we did both show jumping competition and we played a polo match, okay, and obviously practice for it. And then, like I said, in the US, moved on to ride and tie events.
Sir, could you give us a brief overview on what an Ironman race is?
Okay, so Ironman race is a triathlon event, is a combination of swim, cycling and running. For any beginner, he would probably start with a sprint triathlon, an Olympic triathlon, and then move to an Ironman. So I'm covering this because you should know where to start from. And right now, because you have other professional study requirements and commitments, you may not be able to devote so much of time. But I would encourage youngsters to keep it at the bucket list somewhere. That when I settle down, when I'm self-sufficient. When I have time, I'd probably train for this and go ahead. So sprint triathlon is like say 750 meters of swim in the pool, followed by 20 kilometers of cycling and a 5 kilometers run. That is for the beginners, and you just need to be 16 to be able to do this. And then you move on to Olympic triathlon, which is about 1.5 kilometers of swim, about 30 lengths in the pool, and 40 kilometers of cycling and a 10 kilometers run. Okay, this is actually an Olympic event. It's included in every Olympic venue. And beyond that is like endurance events, which the Ironman organization conducts. Once again, there are two formats. One is called Ironman 70.3. 70.3 refers to 70.3 miles, statute miles. So that's about 2 kilometers of swim, 90 kilometers of cycling, and half marathon, which is 21 kilometers. And the cutoff for this is about 8 to 8.5 hours, depending on the venue, slope, degree of difficulty, etc. And the main Ironman event is actually double of this. That is 4 kilometers of swim in the ocean, and then 180 kilometers of cycling, and a full marathon, which is 42 kilometers.
So for how many hours do you train daily in order to participate in these races, and is there any specific diet that you follow on a daily basis?
Okay, nice question. So within the routine that I explained earlier, I try to fit in at least one training event in every 7-day cycle, and try to repeat the weakest event, which is the swim for me. For some it may be run or cycling, and so it doesn't require you to spend more than maybe 1 to 2 hours on a working day, on the day that I have flying, or for anybody going to office on an office day. On the offs, maybe you push a little more to 3 to 4 hours. It is not that you have to train the full format once or twice before you actually shoot for the event. Okay, if you work on individual events and work on your strength training mostly for people of our age, because we may not be able to sustain that rigorous training in our present condition, but for youngsters like you, and even after you settle down, maybe 30s up to 40s also, you may not need so much of strength training to be able to avoid injuries. But thereafter, you inculcate 1 day of strength training in that 7-day cycle, and manage these 4 to 5 days of training within that 7-day period with 2 days of rest. You will be good enough to participate in the race. And this is like amateurs like us. Okay, we are not aiming for medal or something. We are just aiming for safe finish without injury. That's it.
During the time outside of your training or like flight hours, do you like read books or watch movies? Is there any book or movie you recommend us to watch?
Okay, so the one movie that comes to all of us from our background is Top Gun, of course. So our times we had the original Top Gun version, which actually pushed us towards this profession, and now you have the second version, almost how many years now, 30 years later, more than 30 years actually. So that's one movie that I would recommend to all youngsters, and otherwise beyond that I go for soft comedy types rather than serious types. Okay, I was into reading books, but with this training schedule and the need to rest, because rest is very important aspect of this rigorous training. If you don't, then you will not be good enough for training the next day. So actually on the watch I monitor the rest, and also monitor the resting heart rate. The day it doesn't come down to the acceptable level, I skip the training that day. So I monitor it so closely. So with this commitment, I am little off books for a while.
Sir, how many hours do you rest in a day after?
So rest minimum is 6 hours. Okay, on anything less than 6 hours, it shows up on the resting heart rate. Okay, any late night, we have late nights in our schedule. Okay, we can't help it. But only thing is, on that day, I would oversleep a little bit, and then on getting up, I check my RHR. If it is my usual one, which is normally 45, if it is 48, 50 and all, its body is giving me a sign that you're not rested enough, don't push today, or go easy, go for a swim, don't plan your run, something like that. So you tweak a little bit as per what the body is telling you.
So we've read that you've been involved in a lot of evacuations. Could you describe about some of them?
Okay, so I was just fortunate in the heavy lift units especially. In about 2011, there was a crisis in Libya. So anytime there's a crisis, the overseas Indians have to be evacuated. So as soon as the news starts developing, the squadron starts preparing for a mission. So this time we had to go to Cairo and wait there for our orders to go to Libya, pick up these Indians who were in the middle of combat and bring them back to India. So as we were waiting in Cairo, as a reason actually we were waiting in Cairo, we got this news that no fly zone has been imposed. No fly zone means it's enforced by basically NATO, either in Libya or little later over Yemen or Iraq in sometimes in various scenarios. So no further permission was given. So we had to wait for the evacuation by sea from a port called to a port called Alexandria. So when they reached Alexandria, we took off from Cairo and brought one set of passengers, overseas Indian citizens, back to India. So that was one evacuation mission. And little later, it was a big consolidated exercises when similar crisis developed in Yemen. So Yemen civil war always once again got the embassy involved for planning evacuation of the Indians stuck there. But the entry into Yemen was restricted. Already the two civil groups that were fighting the civil war were fighting for control of the airport, and it was uncertain whether it was safe to go and land and pick them up. And by the time I had transitioned to Globemaster C-17s, C-17 was a brand new platform. And in any case, they were little apprehensive about allowing a military aircraft to land. So Air India aircraft were allowed to land into Sana'a, which is the capital, and then they would get them out into Djibouti, which is just across the strait. And from there we were waiting to get them to India. There were also simultaneous missions by sea, like these people would reach the coastal towns, and with help of regular speed boats, they would be transferred to INS, Indian naval ships, waiting a little further away because they can't go too close to the coast. And then from there, they would take an overnight journey and come and reach us in Djibouti. There will be immigration formalities, and we would fly them to various cities as per the majority of the evacuees, either Kochi, Mumbai, or Kochi and Mumbai, and sometimes even Delhi, depending on the composition of the team. So we did almost 11 to 12 missions like that over a period of 10 days with about 3 aircraft.
So sir, what is more difficult, taking off or landing an aircraft?
So obviously it's landing the aircraft which is challenging. So take off minus the abnormals, all of you can take off in 2 attempts, okay, on the simulator, that is. Okay. So landing requires a little more. So most of the training, especially in Air Force, you would go for your solo check, that is a qualified instructor or a supervisor will take you for a solo check after about 15 to 20 sorties. There is a syllabus laid down. First there will be pure general handling, how to handle the aircraft in all 3 planes, turns, climb, descent, a little bit of aerobatics, and then pure circuit and landing. Circuit and landing, like there's a pattern, you take off, turn, crosswind, downwind, base leg and approach. So you do these circuits, about 5 to 6 circuits in every sortie. Do 5 to 6 such sorties with an instructor, and the supervisor will take you for a solo check. So then if you perform to the safe standards and satisfactory standards, you'll be cleared for solo. So it takes about 15 to 20 depending on the type of aircraft for learning landing to the level of proficiency required to go on your own.
What are your best hours of driving a jet, of flying a jet?
So most of it close formation was little, I mean not just the display one, the formation flying and the maneuvers which are like culminate into aerial combat, practice aerial combat. Those are the most challenging ones. Not to leave behind the air to ground firing, because air to ground firing is instant results. You fire, the range safety officer notes where the rocket or bomber has gone, and he'll tell you on radio, so and so clock code, so and so distance, or a direct hit. Direct hit means you hit the target. So that's another level of accomplishment.
So, what were some of the training procedures that were done to keep up with the speed of the jets, of the fighters?
So it's always a gradual progression. So the basic training on Indian Air Force was on, in our times, a trainer called Kiran. Now we got a better trainer called Pilatus. So that's a moderate speed, preparing aspiring trainees for handling various situations, and then you move on to the fighters through an intermediate trainer called Hawk. Okay, that's one step higher. So then you get accustomed to it, consolidate on it, and then you move on to these mainstream fighters like MiGs and Mirages and Sukhois, and now Rafales. Okay, so it's a gradual progression. The training curriculum takes care of your comfort level.
So, what preparations required to crack the NDA exam?
Okay, so NDA exam is in two parts. One is the UPSC written examination. So that's normally held, I think it's the middle of 12th class for your entry after 12th. Okay. In our time, it used to be middle of 11th. We used to go after 11th, so we used to skip 12th class. That was a big incentive for us to go and join the NDA. But now it is 12th class. Okay, so UPSC exam has got, I think, some maths questions, some science, English, and general knowledge questions, and a little bit of reasoning ability also. So this is about 900 marks, and then once you clear it, and it doesn't require superior intelligence to clear that. You have basics, focus on your strong points, because there is syllabus given in the UPSC advertisement. Focus on your strong points, attempt those questions which you're comfortable with without wasting time, because time is premium, and then you will easily make it. The next process is a little tough, which is Service Selection Board interview. That's a 5-day process wherein you report to a selection board. They're all across the country, including Bangalore. We got one at the MG Road, if you have ever come across that. So you report, and then on the first day there is screening. Screening is also pretty intensive, and then they take out about 30%, and then they make them go through 3 sets of tests. One is psychology test, then the group testing, and finally the interview. Okay, so at the end of 4th or 5th day, they will screen and clear some candidates for the medical examination to be joining the NDA. Okay. Now it is open for boys as well as girls. I hope you know about it. Okay. This is one entry into the services. There is also another entry after graduation, that is, or towards the end of the graduation, through what is known as CDS entry, Combined Defence Services Examination. That is combined once again for all 3 services, and there will be no combined training at National Defence Academy. That's the only difference. So they will directly go to the respective services. So Air Force cadets will go to the Air Force Academy, Navy cadets will go to the Naval Academy, and Army cadets will go to the Indian Military Academy in Dehradun. So that, but the process is same. CDS is through UPSC written examination and the SSB interview thereafter.
So, sir, how can you ensure that you stand out in an NDA interview?
So for this, I think just good enough to be a natural self. Of course, you can get familiar with the pattern and come to know what is expected from you. There are various sites available to learn about this. I can share some of them and prepare for what is going to come in the sequence of events that we have just discussed. That is psychology test, then group testing, and the various tasks in it, and the interview.
Thank you.
So, why did you leave the Air Force and decide to go for commercial?
Okay, so I had finished at all the field tenures. Okay, so I moved on to the headquarters, and from that position as well as the position that would follow later, I would not have been able to meet my family obligations. I had both parents pretty ill, and both my brothers are abroad, so to be able to take care of them, I had to quit. So for about a couple of years after quitting, it just kept nibbling in my mind whether I did the right thing, until about in the COVID, my mother fell down in Hyderabad immediately as the lockdown was declared. So I broke the lockdown, drove through rural areas, reached. I had stayed with her for 2 months in the hospital there. So, and then 2 years later, until she passed away a little recently, I was with her. So whenever it just pinches me if I did the right thing by quitting, this particular episode reassures me that there was no other way that anybody could have firstly reached or helped in that particular situation, because COVID, everybody was apprehensive about what is going to come. So we couldn't have expected anybody else to attend to her. So that's how I had to quit.
So, sir, for our final question, what advice do you have for our young aspirants?
So whether for the Indian Air Force or the civil aviation, I would prefer the entry through Indian Air Force. If somebody is looking for flying career, it exposes you, gives you more opportunities, lets you operate in much varying situations, and then prepares you for the civil aviation little later if you decide to move on, okay, rather than an entry direct into the civil aviation. Not just aviation, any particular field that you would choose. I think the present generation is pretty smart and driven to go for it. It need not be through this uniform only that you serve the country. You could be nation building through any other profession, mostly engineering, or serving the nation through even medical services, legal services, anything. So you stay focused and pursue something that you're passionate about, so that there is no fatigue involved ever. That's what I would give it to the youngsters.
That was indeed a very fruitful interaction. We thank you for taking time off your busy schedule in order to come here and inform us more about aviation as a career. Your experiences and learnings have been very valuable, and I'm sure will be kept in the minds of all those who wish to pursue aviation as their career of choice in the future. We would like to thank the management, the principal, and all the teachers for providing us with this special opportunity. And finally, we would like to thank you, the viewers, for remaining with us till the very end, and we hope you have enjoyed and learned as much as we have during today's session. Let the skies of tomorrow be ready for our Sherwoodians.